poem First Lesson by Philip Booth, a UU favorite, from a UU in Maine. It's first published in his 1950 poems. Feels like an abstraction that mirrors time and nature. He wrote this one, a very clear and emotional poem about teaching his daughter to swim. To be honest, I can't find another poem like it in his collections. Maybe he just got it right this time. Maybe that moment with his daughter was the important moment in his life. And it's been read in this church many times, some for the right reasons and some for the wrong reasons. Lie back, daughter, and let your head be tipped back in the cup of my hand. To those of us who have raised children, this feels like a real moment. Probably took place in the bath, when an infant being held in our hand looks up at us and stares into our eyes, not knowing anything but love for us, not knowing anything about the world. And we hold that child gently with that child's life in the cup of our hands as the soap and water wash back over the head. It takes attention and gentleness in those moments as we are the holders of life. And we, in those moments, are learning about love. And the person held without words is understanding love and is learning about trust. So goes the poem, lie gently and the sea will hold you. Now, I can't float for the world of me, so I'm not sure about all this. Put me in a pool on my back and I sink like a cinder block. Except the time that I was in the Dead Sea in Israel, where the salt concentration is 280 parts per thousand, about 8 times saltier than the average seawater. In the Dead Sea, with all that salt, you can't do anything but float. Now, I'm sure this has something to do with the stories about Jesus walking on water in the Bible, but that's beside the point. You can't not float in the Dead Sea. But if you distrust the water, you bob up and down, swallowing the most horrible water you could ever taste in your life, and that could really hurt you. So my point is this: I can't float, but when I have achieved it, like in the heavy salt of that sea, I have felt held like an infant in the hands of my caretakers. And when in life I couldn't float, metaphorically speaking, like last week when we had to put down my dog, my loyal companion of 12 years who was by my side so much, or all these last weeks as we continue to fortify the church and deal with the threats of anti-abortion activists, I have been held by people like the youth of this church I was with last week in Boston, who wrote me notes of gratitude and understanding. And like friends who sympathized, and members of this church who repeat they are by my side. And in the midst of all this, like the staff who share the burden of these horrendously violent emails that we are getting, condemning us for helping women get safe and legal abortions. And all that makes me feel held in the float of life. Held in the hands of life. Some call God, some call love. So what holds you? When I ask you that, I mean 2 things. What holds you through the troubled waters? What steadies you in your learning to swim? Loved ones? This church? Your faith in God? your children, your loves and passions, your commitments, some unseen hand of mystery? That's the first question. And the second thing I mean when I ask you what holds you is, what do you know of trust? In my book, there's a chapter on trust, and in it I quote this poem and a story that follows, because I preached using this sermon once before, long ago, asking these similar questions. And on that one Sunday, years ago, in the narthex, just over there, a church member came up to me and said, "Do you remember the feeling of putting yourself in the arms of another?" I didn't really understand what the question was coming out of the sermon and the worship, but then he said, "I learned to swim when I was 45 years old. I was terrified of water. My sister had drowned when I was young, and we didn't spend time on or around the water, but I realized I had to face that fear and learn. And I realized what I was doing was learning to trust again. For 44 years of my life, I distrusted the very thing that flows through all of us, water," he said. "And when I learned to rest in it, my life changed. And not only could I do the breaststroke, but I could trust other people. I could believe in them. I could surrender a piece of myself to every relationship I have." Now, if that person is in this sanctuary today, I want to see you afterward, because I don't remember who it was. But this beautiful statement got into my book for a reason. When I caught my breath after this church member said this, and I thanked him for that story, he turned to me and he said, "I trust you," and he walked off. To tell me that story was a risk for this person. To come to terms with his own fears, and then to act to reclaim them, and to learn to enter the water required a great act of faith. In this way, risk and trust are a handshake. We cannot risk something if we don't trust. And if we don't trust, we retreat into familiarity and even further from others who might help us with our perspective. If we can't trust and risk knowing ourselves and each other, maybe we end up isolated and angry and joining forces with others who are isolated and angry. And this is bad for all of us. You see, I think we have an epidemic of mistrust in our country today. And this is how the epidemic of some of the hateful things that are happening in our society start. This is how young boys turn into murderers and end up shooting schools and supermarkets. This is how so-called patriots find one another and plan an attack and maybe kill people enjoying a pride event in places like Coeur d'Alene, where last week a truck full of men were going to beat up people at a pride festival and stampede the children who were playing with sidewalk chalk because these young men found each other and created an enemy of the LGBT community there. And it starts with a deep mistrust of themselves and the world around them. So I did a little digging about this idea that we have an epidemic of mistrust in our society, and I found Gallup poll's annual rating of honesty and ethics in various professions. And I found this, that 5 years of 22 occupations rated hit new lows in public esteem. It says that the majority of Americans continue to believe that military officers have high ethics, yet the score is down 10%. TV reporters' ethics ratings have fallen 9%, and judges have declined 5%. For the 20th straight year, nurses lead the Gallup poll annual ranking of professions for having the highest honesty and ethics. Any nurses here? Okay, there we are, yeah. Eclipsing medical doctors, sorry medical doctors. And grade school teachers are third. Grade school teachers, anybody? Yeah. And then pharmacists, and then medical, and then military officers. They round out the top 5, right? The least revered professions in our society, lobbyists. Any lobbyists here? Car salespeople. Any car salespeople here? And wait for it, the least revered profession in America, members of Congress. Any members of Congress here? Less than 10% of Americans perceive them as having high ethics. Trust. Trust. So many conversations that I've been in recently point to that we are a nation lacking in trust. And I keep saying to myself, no wonder gun sales are up. And this works both ways in white and black communities. Average middle-class white neighborhoods are isolating themselves from each other, turning us into distrustful people who think no government can save us. And black and brown communities who never had any trust in the authorities have lived with the burden of this simmering distrust for centuries, some of which started on this day in 1865, right here in Texas, or it symbolized it. See, today is Juneteenth, and for those who aren't aware of what that is, today is the celebration of freedom from slavery announced in Texas today, 157 years ago. And it is a celebration. But that was 2 years after emancipation in the rest of the country. Those enslaved people who found out about emancipation in 1863 were beaten and told they were not free. So today in black communities, it is a celebration. And I think it has another side. Because I think it symbolizes the distrust between black and white communities. White communities that tried to keep emancipation from enslaved people here in our state. And to preserve slavery at all costs until the last possible moment. And how this plays out and continues to play out is in distrust built into systems that are built to divide and conquer us and keep us afraid of one another. Because freedom didn't really mean equality for black folks in America. Forces of segregation and economic control kept and keeps black communities from true emancipation. And those strategies that segregated neighborhoods by economics or by sheer fear of violence kept us all locked in this distrusting and often violent relationship since that day 157 years ago. So no wonder the laws changed, but the real welcome didn't. The safety for black communities, the trust between them and others was not built or grown out with freedom, which is why, in part, our racial equity work and the work of the Dallas THRT is so important. Because the fabric of trust and relationship has so far to go and has so much work to be done, but it will heal us all. It is why we have to ask when we read the poem, "Lie back, daughter, who is held and in whose hands? And who is not held, and why?" Lie back, daughter. Some can't lie back, and some wouldn't, but all of us must. I think our effort today is to ponder how we can trust more. And I've been trying. Even while I'm looking over my shoulder when I get out of the car. Even when I'm told that we can't relax on that score, and we have now 2 security guards here, I'm trying to trust more. And to be honest, I'm not afraid for myself. Because I know that you are there. And the work of compassion will win. And these battles that I am in are ancient battles of faith that on our side have always said God is love, and on the other side have said God is a vengeful thing to fear. And on our side, we look at women we're helping get abortions and say, your life matters. And on the other side, they say, you are sinners in need of repair. And in the waters of these old theological battles, I see an inevitable ebb and flow, and it's somehow that gives me strength. You see, I think our goal of spiritual life, or one goal in spiritual life, is to gain a deeper sense of existential comfort and combat that cynical view of the world, that trust built is trust that grows in the world. We risk a lot when we give ourselves over to this and to others and to love and to care. And I have met a lot of people who can't do that because they have been hurt and shattered by relationships or bear the wounds and scars of them. And I have met people who were abused as children who now can't trust enough to have a partner in their lives. And sometimes things like this that we didn't cause fray the fabric of our trust. To trust one another can be a perilous business, especially when there are some who can't return that trust or are reckless with the lives around them. But the strongest thing in the world may be trust born when we give ourselves into another's care. If we lack the ability to do this as a community, our world will lack the ability to do this, friends. So we need each other. That's why we're here on one service, so we can be all together, not separated this summer, because this summer we need each other, and this summer I need you. Erik Erikson said that trust grows from the care of a loving parent, and it is the basis of all faith practices. He said, if we lack love and care in our early years, that lack can cause us to distrust each other deeply, and in his paradigm, then to mistrust God. I think he is right. But I also believe that trust can be strengthened like a muscle if we can face the past with courage and transform the hurt into wholeness. And so I have a few spiritual questions for you today to ponder. Maybe to turn to a neighbor after church, if you're courageous. Maybe to write a note to someone who needs to hear from you. And those questions are, what did you learn about trust in your life? And what and who can you trust now? And what holds you? These are spiritual questions, friends. I hope you can answer them today or this week and hold them in love for the world like a parent who holds the head of a child in the cup of their hands and says, lie back, daughter, be held. Amen, friends.